This is the Plagmanrules Podcast. Everybody, welcome to the Monday edition. It's Monday, October 2nd. Coincidentally, it's also my birthday today. So, few things to talk about today. We only got a couple of topics here. We're going to talk about what happened at the weekend box office. And also, on Friday, we learned about the Men in Black franchise coming back into fashion with a spin-off. I guess that's what you would classify it as. Anyways, I'll have a couple of brief thoughts on that. Okay, so yeah, again, we are doing this on Sunday, technically for the day of recording and posting this on Monday. So, at the moment, the weekend box office is at a very, very close proximity here as far as what's going to be number one, number two, and number three. We've got very much a tight race to figure out what's going to be in what place this weekend. Okay, right now the estimates have it reclaiming the number one spot for its fourth weekend, making another $17.3 million. And I meant to say this last time, but I didn't. But I'm thinking now that it is going to continue to be a movie that drops less than 50% pretty much from now until close to Halloween time. We're not really going to have another big horror movie for another couple weeks until the new Blumhouse production of Happy Death Day. That's coming out on the 13th. And then we've got Jigsaw, and that's going to try to restart the Saw franchise. That's coming out the weekend before Halloween. So we've got those two, but those are about the only horror movies that are going to be in direct competition with it between now and then. So I think it is going to continue to be a player at the box office, maybe not necessarily grabbing the number one spot again. We've got Blade Runner coming out on Friday. That's probably going to top the weekend box office. And then it's the week after that. That's when Happy Death Day comes out. I don't know if that's going to necessarily grab the number one spot. We're going to see how Blade Runner does, but those I think will both be on top of it in its what would then be its sixth week of release. So that is a big sign that yes, this horror movie is not just a couple weekends doing well and then completely falls apart movie. No, this one is sticking with the public in a way that a few horror movies recently have done, and all of them have been really good. Like Get Out, that came out in February, that was number 1, 2, or 3 for like, what was it, a month? It was in the top 3, and then it was another couple weeks in the top 5, and so on and so forth. I think it was in the top 10 of the box office for like a solid 2 months, and that's against some pretty stiff competition there, so that one held well. And I think we also saw the same thing with Don't Breathe last August. That one really clung to the top of the charts as well. Even if it wasn't number 1, it was a close second or third or fourth, and so on and so forth. So we're seeing that horror movies, who usually they get that number 1 spot for one weekend and they totally collapse afterwards, they're around to stay here for a number of good examples. The new Tom Cruise film, American Made, is just ahead of Kingsman: The Golden Circle for second place, at least by the estimates here. 17.01 to 17.00, I guess, if you want to put it that way, for second and third place. Now, I did see American Made this weekend, and I did also see Kingsman. I don't have reviews for those completed yet, so we can maybe get to those on Friday, unless we have no time, depending on what else happens this week. And while I did enjoy myself in American Made, I do think that Kingsman basically was a rehash of the first one, but we'll get more to that when we get the full reviews done. Now, as far as how well American Made has done here, projections were only at about 16 million, so ever so slightly it went above those expectations. I mean, nothing to really celebrate and totally, throw a party for. And it's also one of the lowest Tom Cruise openings in recent years. Both of the Jack Reacher movies did about the same numbers or ever so slightly higher or lower. So it's not like it's an all-time low, but at the same time, I think The Mummy this past summer and this one show that Tom Cruise is not exactly the go-to guy if you want to open your movie at number 1. Now, obviously, I think The Mummy, with its content and with its quality, had a bit to do with that. And with American Made, it was a pretty stiff competition here, and we've had a couple other really adult movies out there that have been doing better, like It, Kingsman, and American Assassin, among a couple other recent ones. Plus, we've got Blade Runner 2049. That's going to be an R-rated content film for adults. That one will probably draw some people in as well. While I do think the movie is good enough that audiences are going to keep going to it, I don't anticipate it being a 50 million plus hit. Probably closer to 45 million when all is said and done. Now, as far as Kingsman goes, falling 56% its second weekend. This is actually worse than I thought it would do, only by a little bit. I was projecting a 55% drop here for like 18 million or 19 million roughly, but to fall 56% its second weekend especially when you compare it to the first Kingsman, which really held well at the box office and was only falling, 30-40% weekend to weekend for a good, 4 or 5 weeks. To see this one drop more than 55% its first weekend, a definite sign that it's not going to do anywhere near the business the first one did. And I think the quality of the film has something to do with that. And also, again, the competition. And we have to remember that the first one opened in February, and it was against 50 Shades of Grey, and there were a few other films that came out in the next few weeks that were, getting some audiences, but Kingsman was kind of out there and like the only action fare, whereas, Blade Runner 2049, while it's a sci-fi film, does have action elements as far as we've seen in the trailers and stuff. And American Assassin is also out there. For the kind of family audiences, you've got Lego Ninjago, which has some action in it. So there's other stuff out there to compare it to, and there wasn't a whole lot of action movies out at the same time as the first Kingsman, so I think that does have something to do with it as well. But this one, I think we're still going to see come close to that $100 million mark here. Now, as far as the Lego Ninjago movie, that one fell 41% for fourth place, and that was making another $12 million. Now, this one, I was anticipating a 40% drop, so it was a little lower than expected, but at the same time, I think that the lack of family audience movies is going to keep this one in the top 5 for probably another week or two, depending on what the competition does here. Still, nothing to celebrate here for Warner Brothers as far as its comparisons to what the other two Lego movies did. Lego Batman did way better in its opening weekend than this one has done in 2 weeks, and the Lego movie was even higher, and it's actually done now about half of what the first Lego movie did its opening weekend. So again, nothing to celebrate here, even though family audiences have nothing much to go to. I think a few of them are keeping a few other films in mind that are coming out later, like we'll have Thor Ragnarok, or you can maybe classify Daddy's Home 2 as a kind of comedy film that could be appropriate for some smaller kids. I think it'll only have a PG-13 rating, and a lot of kids go to those anyways if they're forced to by their parents. So there's some stuff coming out here in about 5 or 6 weeks that I think will be good alternatives for those family audiences. But Lego, I think, is still going to have a little bit of power to it, but not a whole lot. Flatliners, the remake of Flatliners, was down in 5th place, making $6.7 million. This is, again, a really bad sign for recent movies that have been horror thrillers or classified as such. So this makes it 3 for 3 of recent examples of horror thrillers that have really not done well for what the market is now. Of course, It is continuing to do extremely well, blowing off all sorts of records and all that. So Mother opened up against it in its second weekend, didn't do so well. Then we had Friend Request from last weekend, that did terribly. And now Flatliners barely making it above $6.5 million. Again, a sign that you don't want to really open a horror thriller right against It. Now, as far as whether or not Happy Death Day is going to do well, that one's going to have the benefit of opening on a Friday the 13th. That definitely gets a little jump to it. And you'll also have to consider that it will have been in its 6th weekend by then, so that means that a lot of the audiences and repeat audiences who want to go see it again are pretty much going to be saying, well, I think I'd rather see something else this time. And that's not to say that It is going to totally collapse after that. It's on track to make probably close to 325 or maybe even 350 million domestically, depending on what it does the next couple weekends. But it's definitely not a good time to be a horror thriller if you're not It. Okay, a couple other things to talk about here. We had Battle of the Sexes expanding into wide release this weekend, and that made about $3.4 million by the estimates here for a per theater average of a little under 3,000. It's not great to have a number that low, and I think Fox Searchlight really should have kept this one it was 20 theaters last weekend, probably should have expanded it to 100, and then maybe 300, then 500, and then do the wide release in the late October range. But we could see actually that strategy going against them, because we have Focus Features opening up Victoria and Abdul into 77 theaters this weekend, and that one's continuing to do very, very well. We'll see how that one's going to go here, if that's going to go into like 500 and then 1,000 in the next couple weeks, or how that one's going to go. But at the same time, I think really Victoria and Abdul, and then when we get to October, the Florida Project, I think is going to do very, very well in its limited run, and then when it goes likely into wide release by late October, whatever, then okay, maybe you have a little competition there. But it's two totally different subject matters in that case, and I still think they probably would have done better in that scenario. But still, we'll see if it works out for them. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, they'll keep adding a few more theaters and a few more theaters, and as the audience starts to grow again and again, we'll maybe see it crack 15 or 20 million. But in the meantime here, it's not exactly a solid start there. We already mentioned Victoria and Abdul. It was only in 77 theaters this weekend, and it cracked $1 million, a little over $1 million by the estimates here, for a per theater average of over $13,000. And if you check that out, that is the second best per theater average of the weekend. There was a small film that opened in one theater that got a little bit more. But still a big success there, again, for a movie that didn't have a lot of solid reviews. There's a lot of mixed reactions to that movie, and it still is doing very, very well, which means that, yeah, this one, when it does get into the wider release, will probably have a very good audience reaction and will probably do well as it keeps expanding. Okay, the only other one we're going to mention here is Lucky. This is, of course, the last film by the recently deceased actor Harry Dean Stanton, and I think his death really fueled more and more interest in the project, and it only opened in 5 theaters this weekend for $46,000, and if you do the math there, that's $9,200 per theater, which was maybe a little lower than I thought it would, but still, I think that number is lower if you don't have the sad fact of Harry Dean Stanton's passing. So we'll see if that one, as it continues to grow here as we get into October, as far as theater count, we'll see if that one can maybe take off a little bit more. But as far as what the Oscars are going to do with this, we've looked ahead now a little bit, and we've got some recent players here, like Jake Gyllenhaal in Stronger, and you've got Gary Oldman, and Denzel's going to be in the race this year. We've got supposedly Daniel Day-Lewis's last chance to be nominated for an Oscar. You've also got Tom Hanks in The Post, and a few other nominees here and there who could potentially get in there. So we're really going to have, I think, a very, very stiff competition in Best Actor. Like I said, it's been done before. Heath Ledger passed away, and of course that was maybe the performance of his life, and Harry Dean Stanton has been getting some of those comparisons there. We'll see if it works out, and if Lucky does indeed have some luck to it. Okay, so that's it for the weekend box office here. If something major significant happens and we get the final numbers officially late Monday, we can come back to it on Friday if we have a big change-up, say Kingsman all of a sudden is number 1 and It is number 3 or something, something major like that. But still, I think something that really caught my attention here was this story that came out from Deadline on Friday, saying that Sony Pictures is going back into the Men in Black franchise for, I guess it's a spin-off. Okay, so a little bit of a history lesson here. Men in Black 1, I think, of course, when it opened at the time, that was at the height of Will Smith's powers at the box office. Huge box office smash, and, was one of the highest grossing films of all time for a little while there. And it was really a fun movie to look back on, and it's a movie that's still influencing films today. Like, I thought the first Kingsman movie basically was a British spy version of Men in Black. Then we've got Men in Black 2, which was a total rehash, unoriginal film, and, rightfully, I think, died its death, and is not really very highly regarded today. Then Men in Black 3 came, I think it was a full 10 years later. Personally, I thought it was probably the best of the franchise, and I know I'm totally alone on that, but, seeing Josh Brolin and that interaction with he and Will Smith was great. Seeing Tommy Lee Jones in that small role that he had, still, it was fun to see them back together for the limited amount of screen time they had. And it was perhaps the film with the most heart of the trilogy. So right away after Men in Black 3, they were talking about, oh yeah, we'll do Men in Black 4, but then Men in Black 3 just collapsed at the box office, at least domestically. Worldwide, it did a little better, but it wasn't like, let's go ahead and get everything going, because it was like a $250 million budget, and they hardly made a big profit on it. So they're like, okay, let's scrap that. And then we heard probably the most ridiculous idea ever, which would have been a crossover between 21 Jump Street and Men in Black. Now, seriously, I didn't know what to think of this when it came out. Immediately, everybody online just went on and just, started typing frantically saying, this is the worst thing ever! This is the worst thing ever! Sony can go, and so on and so forth. But I personally was like, yeah, I don't get it if you're gonna cross over the Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum characters with the Men in Black as played by Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. That, for me, I think would have been a disaster. But I did have kind of an idea cooking in the back of my head where it was like, well, what if they totally did a complete flip on this, and it's the Men in Black, and it's 2 girls, like 2 girl Men in Black agents. And I was thinking about it, I was like, well, who would be a good foil there? I thought about it, and Anna Kendrick and Allison Brie came to mind. And I was like, if they can do that, if they can sign Allison Brie and Anna Kendrick alongside Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill in a Men in Black 21 Jump Street crossover, you have a lot of comedic elements there right away with the introduction scene. It's like, you're supposed to be the Men in Black, right? And then you can go back and forth with gender jokes and stuff. I thought that would have been a cool scene there. And then, of course, I don't know what the full plot would have been, but I thought that actually could have worked. If they did something and totally flipped the idea on its head and made it even funnier. At least in my opinion. Now, of course, if you're hearing this, you're probably thinking that's the stupidest thing ever. But anyways, I thought that at least sounded better than doing the Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones meets Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum characters. That would not have worked. And I'm still really looking forward to what the 21 Jump Street follow-up is going to be. If they're going to do it 23 Jump Street or what is going on there. But I miss those movies. Those first two are very, very funny movies. Anyway, so back to Men in Black here. Now, supposedly, we've got a couple of writers here who have turned in a script for a potential, I don't know, I guess the best way and what everybody's kind of describing it is as a spin-off movie that's basically what Jurassic World was to Jurassic Park. So who's writing this? It's Matt Holloway and Art Markham, who recently wrote Transformers The Last Knight. Okay, immediately I hate this. But who also actually wrote the first Iron Man movie, or co-wrote it, actually. I think there was another writer involved there. So basically their idea is, from what I'm reading here, is that it's going to be a reboot to the franchise without Will Smith, without Tommy Lee Jones, that's set in the same Men in Black universe. So it's going to be a reboot, but those characters happened, I guess, is the way that I'm reading this, is that, maybe they're both retired or they're both on a mission somewhere totally different, and these two agents or three agents, who knows how many they're going to have here. But let's suppose they still have that same formula of two agents doing that, and I don't know. That kind of sounds weird to me, and I personally am not too excited about this one. I have to hear more. I have to hear, okay, who's in talks to direct this? Who's in talks to star in it. And we got a release date set for the weekend before Memorial Day in 2019, so that gets it back to that May date that Men in Black 3 had. I don't know about this one. Like I've said, I'm not really getting excited here for this. Personally, what I would have thought would have been cool in a Men in Black franchise, other than that whole thing I just mentioned with two female Men in Black agents, I think it would have been cool if we'd seen either new characters or the same characters, whether that be Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones or somebody else. What if they did something cool where they were on an alien planet and they were infiltrated and they're on a secret mission, they're undercover or something on an alien world? I think that could have actually brought up a lot of cool possibilities, because obviously, number one, the production design and special effects, you could do something totally original, something totally never before seen, and create some really weird planets and stuff, and it could really be fun, and I think the Men in Black franchise, while it certainly does have, the New York atmosphere, which makes it pretty much a unique experience in that way. I kind of love that idea, actually, that it's set in New York, and you have all these landmarks that are, really famous for actually being totally alien related when they're not even, according to the official explanations and all that. But still, I think something like that, if you had set it off world and say you're on, in a totally different galaxy and you're undercover agents or something, I think that would have been cool. Now, obviously, my ideas aren't worth jack squat to what's actually going to happen, but to hear that it's kind of a reboot, and I guess it's still set on Earth, at least by everything I'm reading here, and it's basically a Jurassic World version of the Men in Black franchise, I'm not excited yet. Tell me who's in it. Tell me who's directing it. Tell me, maybe a few more story details here and there, what the characters' names are, if we're going to get a cameo or something from Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. We know, at least from this, they're not expected to return in like a full starring role. Are they going to have supporting roles? Let us know more about it. Now, of course, since it's just announced now, we're probably not going to hear about this again for a couple months. But at the same time, I'm not going to get excited about it until I hear more. All right, ladies and gents. Well, I guess that's all we can talk about for now. Like I said, I have seen a couple of those movies recently. I also saw Stronger, and I'll probably have reviews for those done by the end of the week, so we can probably catch up on those on Friday's show. And of course, we'll probably have some late-breaking movie news coming out of New York Comic Con as that starts up later later this week. So if anything big drops there, we'll discuss it and stuff. Now, quickly before we go, if you do have any ideas or discussion points you want brought up on the show, you can put a response down in the comments section here. I also have a Gmail account set up. That's plagmanrulespodcast@gmail.com. PLAGMANRULES podcast@gmail.com. Again, if you have a discussion point, something in the news I missed, or something significant you want brought up, or a request of some kind, go ahead and leave a comment here, or again, use that Gmail account. Also, let me know if you like or dislike the podcast here. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that, and let me know if you have any suggestions as far as anything you think would improve the Plagman Rules Podcast. All right, so we'll be back again on Friday. Until then, this has been the Plagman Rules Podcast.